Wyatt Callahan held that small piece of paper until his hands stopped shaking. Then he read it one more time. And I'm sorry, I can't go through with this. 7 words. And that was all she left him. No name, no explanation. And no goodbye. He had stood on that platform for 4 hours waiting for a woman he had never touched, only loved through letters, and she never came. And if this story already has your heart, hit subscribe and follow every part until the end. And drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Wyatt Callahan drove his wagon into Red Valley Station, he was humming. That alone should have told someone something was wrong. Wyatt Callahan did not hum. He was not that kind of man. He was the kind of man who checked fence lines twice before sunrise, who kept his accounting books in handwriting so precise it looked printed, who had buried a wife and a son in the same winter 6 years ago, and had not fully laughed since. But that morning, October 14th, 1886, he was humming something that might have been a hymn and might have been a lullaby, and he did not even notice he was doing it. He had a new shirt on, dark blue, pressed flat, still carrying the faint smell of the seated chest, where he had stored it for a year, waiting for an occasion worth wearing it to. He had polished his boots, he had brushed his hat, he had even trimmed the beard that most days he left to its own ambitions. The men at his ranch had noticed. His hired hand, a weathered Texan named Dolph McCready, who had worked the Callahan property for 11 years, had watched Wyatt climb onto the wagon seat that morning and said, very slowly, "You look like a man fixing to do something irreversible." Wyatt had grinned, actually grinned, and said, "That's exactly what I'm doing." He did not say anything else. He clicked his tongue at the horses and rode toward town, and Dolph stood in the yard, watching him go with an expression that might have been hope or might have been worry, because with Wyatt Callahan, those two things had always looked the same. The station at Red Valley was the biggest building in 3 counties, which was not saying much. It was a timber-framed structure with a waiting room that smelled of coal smoke and boot leather, a ticket window staffed by a man named Gerald, who had once told Wyatt he had seen more human drama pass through this station than any theater in St. Louis could manufacture. Gerald had not been wrong. Wyatt arrived 90 minutes before the train was due. He had calculated the drive, added time for mud on the North Road, added more time just because this was the most important day he had lived in 6 years, and he was not going to be late. He tied his horses at the post outside, checked the water trough, and walked into the station carrying a small cloth-wrapped package under one arm. Inside the package was a pair of gloves, soft cream-colored kidskin gloves with 3 pearl buttons at the wrist. He had ordered them from a catalog in Denver 3 weeks ago, spent more money than he would normally spend on himself in a month, and had them shipped express because he wanted to give her something the moment she stepped off that train. Not flowers dyed, not jewelry that felt like pressure. Just gloves. Because she had mentioned once in a letter that the Ohio winters had never quite left her hands. And he had thought, I can fix that. That's one small thing I can fix. He sat down on a bench in the waiting room. He set the package on the bench beside him. He folded his hands on his knees and he waited. The first hour was fine. He was good at waiting. A rancher's whole life was waiting. Waiting for rain, waiting for calves to drop, waiting for prices to come up, or wolves to pass through, or spring to remember what it was supposed to do. Wyatt had built patience into his bones the way other men build muscle. He watched the other passengers in the waiting room. There were 2 families, clearly settlers moving west, the children running loose between the benches while the parents stared at maps with exhausted eyes. There was a drummer in a too-tight suit who kept checking his pocket watch. There was an elderly woman in black who sat perfectly still for the entire hour, hands folded, eyes closed, either sleeping or praying. Wyatt could not tell which. And there were 2 other men, waiting men. Men with the same look. Wyatt suspected he was wearing a careful, studied calm that was actually anything but calm. Mail-order marriages were not uncommon in 1886. The frontier was full of men who had built something, land, cattle, a structure of a life, and were now staring at the empty half of it. And and the East was full of women who had reasons to want something new. The arrangement made its own kind of practical sense, even if it made the romantics uncomfortable. Wyatt had not entered into it lightly. He had written 31 letters before he sent the first one. He had spent 2 months reading through the correspondence agency's listings, discarding woman after woman not for cruel reasons, but because he was honest enough with himself to know what he was looking for, and careful enough to admit that it mattered. Then he had found Amelia's listing. It was shorter than most. No long inventory of virtues, no flowery language about homesteading and fresh starts. Just a woman who said she liked books and early mornings, who said she was not afraid of hard work, who said she wanted to be useful to someone and wanted, in return, to be treated like a person. That last part had stopped him. To be treated like a person. He had written her that same night, and she had written back within the week. Over the next 4 months, they had exchanged 47 letters. He knew because he had kept everyone bundled with a length of twine in the drawer of his writing desk. They were not all love letters. In fact, most of them weren't. They were the letters of 2 people trying to honestly know each other before betting their futures on the knowledge. She had told him about Ohio, about her father's illness, about the 2 brothers who had left and never come back, about the small house she had grown up in where the kitchen always smelled like bread and something was always slightly broken. She had asked him about the land not in a romantic way, but in a practical way, the way a person asks about a place they are actually planning to live. How cold does it get? Does the water run good? Are their neighbors close enough to matter? He had answered every question. He had told her about the hard winters and the blue sky summers and the way the grass turned golden in September and the wind came down from Canada in November and did not stop until March. He had told her about Dolph and the 2 other hands, about the herd, about the house that had 3 rooms and a good fireplace and a porch where you could see the mountains on clear days. He had told her the house felt too quiet. She had written back, "I know what too quiet feels like. I've been living in it for years." That was when he had asked her to come, and she had said yes. The train was 12 minutes late, which was almost on time by Western standards. Wyatt heard the whistle before he saw anyone move, and then the whole waiting room shifted. Children scrambled back to their parents. The drummer straightened his coat. The elderly woman opened her eyes and gathered her bag with steady, deliberate hands. Wyatt stood up. He picked up the package with the gloves. He walked out to the platform. The 2 other waiting men were already there. And they stood the way men stand when they are trying not to look nervous, feet apart. Weight even. Hands still. Wyatt recognized the stance because he was doing it himself. The train came in with a great deal of sound and steam, the cars lurching to a stop in a sequence, and then the doors opened and people began to pour out. Wyatt watched every face. A young woman with red hair, not her. A woman with 2 small children who ran immediately to a man waiting at the far end of the platform. Another woman, older, searching the crowd with her eyes until she found whoever she was looking for, and her whole face changed. One of the 2 other waiting men stepped forward with a fumbling. Sudden joy, and Wyatt watched him meet a woman half his age and shake her hand formally. Both of them blushing. And he thought, that's one. Good for them. More passengers, more faces. Wyatt scanned them all. The stream of people was thinning now. He moved closer to the train, looking into the doorways of each car. She might still be aboard, he told himself. Could be gathering her things. Could have a heavy trunk. He waited. The conductor came through, helping a man with a crutch down the steps. Behind him, no one. "Excuse me," Wyatt said. The conductor looked up. "Is there anyone still in the cars? Anyone still coming off?" The conductor was a round-faced man with a precise mustache. He glanced back down the length of the train. "Let me check," he said. He was gone for 4 minutes, Wyatt counted, and came back shaking his head. "Car by car," he said. "All clear. Everyone who is getting off at Red Valley has gotten off." Wyatt looked at the platform. The second waiting man had found his woman. Wyatt had not even noticed it happen. They were standing together near the station entrance, talking in low, careful voices, both of them working out the first minutes of a life that had just permanently changed. Wyatt was alone. The 1040 from Cheyenne, he said to the conductor. Did she come through Cheyenne? She came through Cheyenne. Is there a passenger list I could see? The conductor looked at him with the neutral kindness of a man who had seen this before. I'll get you to the station master, he said. Gerald, the station master, was sympathetic and useless. There was no passenger list that would help people bought tickets under various names, and a young woman traveling alone from Ohio would have transferred lines at least twice. Gerald could tell him what trains had arrived, but not which specific person had been on which specific car. Could she have missed a connection? Wyatt asked. Certainly possible, Gerald said. Connections through Omaha can be rough. If she missed the junction at, when's the next train from that direction? Day after tomorrow, evening arrival. Wyatt exhaled slowly through his nose. All right, he said. He sat back down on the bench in the waiting room. He was there for another 2 hours before he thought to check the ladies' waiting room, the small antechamber off the main hall, where women traveling alone could sit away from the general crowd. He did not want to seem inappropriate, so he asked Gerald's assistant, a young woman named Clara, to check for him. Clara came back out in 30 seconds holding something. It was a valise, small brown leather with a brass clasp. The kind of bag a woman might carry on a train, keeping her most essential things close. It was under the bench, Clara said. No one in there. Just this. Wyatt took it from her with both hands. He stood there for a moment, just holding it, feeling the weight of it. Not heavy. A woman's personal things. A change of clothes, perhaps. Letters. Whatever she had thought she would need immediately upon arriving. Whatever she had thought she would need and then had not. He opened the clasp. He had no right to, he knew that. But he opened it anyway because something cold had moved through him when Clara carried that bag out, and the cold thing needed an answer. Inside, a folded dress carefully packed, a small book he checked the spine, a novel, something with a red cover, a hairbrush with a tortoise shell handle, a handkerchief with small blue flowers embroidered in the corner, and a piece of paper. He almost missed it. It was folded small and tucked beneath the handkerchief as if someone had placed it there quickly without thinking it through or with too much thought, the kind of note you write when you are trying not to think too hard about what you are doing. He unfolded it. The handwriting was familiar. He had read 47 letters in this hand. It said, I'm sorry, I can't go through with this. Nothing else. Wyatt read it 3 times. Then he folded it exactly as he had found it and placed it back in the bag and closed the clasp and sat down on the bench with the bag on his knees and the package of gloves still under his arm, and for a long time he did not move. Gerald found him there an hour later. Mr. Callahan, he said carefully, you've been here most of the day. I'm aware, Wyatt said. Is there anything I can do? Wyatt looked up at him. Gerald was a decent man. He had worked this station for 16 years and had seen, as he said, more human drama than any theater could manufacture. He was not looking at Wyatt with pity. He was looking at him with the steady, cautious respect of a man who understood that some kinds of pain needed to be left alone. She left a bag, Wyatt said. I'd like to leave it here if you don't mind. In case she comes back for it. Of course. And if she does come back for it, he stopped. Thought if she does, I'd appreciate you letting me know. You have the address of my ranch. I do, Gerald said. I'll make a note. Wyatt stood up. He set the valise on the bench beside him, and he held it there for 1 extra second, his hand flat on the leather top of it, and then he let go. He walked to the door of the station. He stopped. He turned around and went back to the bench and picked up the package of gloves and carried them back to the door with him. He did not know why. They were not useful. She was not here to receive them. But he could not make himself leave them behind. He walked out of Red Valley Station as the sun was going down. He did not look back. The drive home took 2 hours, and he made it in silence. No humming, not the faintest possibility of humming. Dolph was waiting up when the wagon came through the gate. He was sitting on the porch steps with a lantern and a mug of coffee and no expression on his face, which told Wyatt that Dolph had already read everything he needed to from the way the wagon was moving alone, slow, without the particular energy that a man returning with someone carries even from a distance. Dolph did not ask any questions. He just stood up and took the horses when Wyatt climbed down and said, "There's stew on." "I'm not hungry," Wyatt said. "I know," Dolph said. "And it's there anyway." Wyatt went inside. He sat at the kitchen table. He did not eat the stew. He sat in the dark and did not light a lamp. And after a while, he took the piece of paper out of his shirt pocket. He had put it there, taken it from the bag before leaving the station, told himself he had no right to it and taken it anyway, and he read it one more time in the dark by memory rather than sight. "I'm sorry, I can't go through with this." 7 words. He turned it over in his mind the way you turn a stone over, looking for something underneath it. Because something about it was wrong. He could not name it yet. He was too raw to name it. But something about those 7 words did not sit flat against everything he had read in 47 letters. And the fact that it did not sit flat kept him at the table long after the stove went cold. Amelia Bennett did not write that way. She wrote in full sentences. She wrote with precision and care, the way a woman writes who has been told all her life that her words don't matter much and has decided quietly to make every one of them count. She did not abbreviate. She did not trail off. She would not have written, "I can't go through with this." She would have said what she meant. She always said what she meant. Wyatt sat with that thought for a long time. Then he folded the note and put it back in his pocket and went to bed without sleeping. The next morning he rode back to Red Valley Station. He told himself it was because the next train might bring her. He told himself there might have been a misconnection, a delay, a simple, terrible miscommunication. He told himself all the reasonable things. He watched the evening train come in. She was not on it. He asked Gerald again. Gerald shook his head with genuine sympathy. Wyatt rode home in the dark. He did not go back after that, not to look for her. But he sent letters, one to the correspondence agency in Chicago, one to the address in Ohio she had given him, one to a cousin of hers she had mentioned once who lived in Cincinnati. The agency wrote back to say that Amelia Bennett had notified them of a change in plans and that the matter was considered closed. The Ohio address returned his letter unopened. The Cincinnati cousin did not respond at all. Every door he knocked on, nothing. 3 weeks after the day at the station, Dolph came in one evening while Wyatt was going through his accounts and sat down uninvited at the table. "You're not eating," Dolph said. "I eat. Not like a man who plans to keep going." Wyatt put his pen down. "I'm fine, Dolph, you're not fine. You're doing that thing where you go real quiet and start working 17 hours a day and convince yourself that if you just stay busy enough, the thing that's hurting you will get tired of waiting and leave on its own." Wyatt looked at him. Dolph was 61 years old, had been married twice, had buried a child of his own, and had the particular authority of a man who had already walked through the fire you were currently approaching. "Does it work?" Wyatt asked. "No," Dolph said. "It never works. The hurt just gets better at waiting than you do." Wyatt was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Something doesn't add up, Dolph." "About the woman?" "About the note. The note she left." He reached into his pocket. He still carried it. He had been carrying it every day since the station and placed it flat on the table between them. "Read that." Dolph picked it up, read it, set it down, looked at Wyatt. 7 words, Wyatt said. "She wrote me 47 letters. Some of them were 4 pages long. She wrote about everything: her father's cough, the particular way Ohio mud smells different from other mud, a book she read when she was 12 that she still thinks about. She wrote me the name of her childhood cat. You understand what I'm saying?" Dolph looked at the note again. "You're saying this doesn't sound like her." "It doesn't sound like her at all." Wyatt leaned forward. "A woman who writes 4-page letters about mud does not disappear with 7 words. Dolph was quiet for a moment. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking something happened on that train." Wyatt's voice was careful, measured the way it got when he was working through a problem he could not yet see all the edges of. "I'm thinking she didn't leave because she changed her mind." "Then why did she leave?" "That," Wyatt said, "is what I'm going to find out." Started with what he knew. She had boarded a train in Ohio. That much was confirmed. The agency had a date of departure. She had been traveling for 3 days, changing lines twice, once in Chicago, Once in Omaha. She should have arrived in Red Valley on the afternoon of October 14th. She had not arrived, but her bag had, and her bag had that note. Wyatt wrote to the station masters in Chicago and Omaha, asking whether any incidents involving a young woman traveling alone had been reported. He wrote to the Pinkerton Agency office in Denver, asking what it would cost to run an inquiry. He wrote to 2 more addresses he found in Amelia's letters, people she had mentioned by name, friends or near acquaintances from Ohio. He did not tell Dolph or the hands what he was doing. He did not want anyone's opinion. He did not want to be talked out of it or into it. He wanted information, and he was going to collect it the way he collected everything, methodically, without drama, one piece at a time. The Omaha station master wrote back first. A young woman matching Amelia's description, dark hair, green eyes, traveling alone with a brown leather bag, had been seen at the Omaha Junction on October 12th in the company of a man the station master described as known to local rail personnel, name of Whitmore, who runs some kind of land speculation operation. Whitmore. Wyatt read that name twice. He did not know it, but he wrote it down. Then he sat very still at his desk for a long moment. Because the cold thing that had moved through him at the station, when Clara carried out that bag, it was back. It was sharper now. It had edges. Something had happened to Amelia Bennett on the way to Montana. Something that had a name, Caleb Whitmore. And Wyatt Callahan, for the first time since October 14th, was not sitting with grief. He was sitting with something much more productive. He was sitting with purpose. He did not tell Dolph that night. He sat at the table and laid out everything he knew on paper, arranging it the way you arrange pieces of a puzzle when you don't yet have the picture on the box. And the shape that was emerging, incomplete, rough-edged, but undeniably there was not the shape of a woman who had changed her mind. It was the shape of something done to her. He picked up the note one more time. I'm sorry, I can't go through with this. He turned it over. And on the back, so faint he had not seen it before because he had read it in grief, not in calculation, and grief makes you blind to the edges of things. There was something else, 4 letters, pressed into the paper, barely legible, like someone had started to write more and been stopped before finishing. Not a word, just a fragment. Help. Wyatt stared at it for a long time. Then, very quietly, in the empty kitchen of the house that had been too quiet for 6 years, he said, I'm coming. He folded the note. He put it back in his pocket. He stood up and went to check the map on the wall, the one that showed the rail lines from Omaha south and west, the junction towns, the places a man with a name like Caleb Whitmore might take a woman and lose her in the geography of a territory that was still half wilderness and half law. He traced the lines with one finger, methodical, patient, the way a rancher works, the way a man works when he is that this is the one thing that will not slip through his hands. He had been patient long enough. It was time to start looking. He did not know that Amelia Bennett was already looking back. Not for rescue. For a way to become the woman she had never had permission to be until everything was taken from her. And she discovered that losing everything is sometimes the only way to find what you are made of. But that part of the story was still ahead of him. For now, there was just a man in a quiet house, a faded note in his pocket, and a name, Caleb Whitmore, and a question that was no longer where did she go, but what did he do to her, and then underneath that, the question that would drive the next year of his life, is it too late? The name Caleb Whitmore sat in Wyatt's mind like a splinter, small, invisible, and impossible to ignore. He had written it down on a piece of paper and pinned it above his desk, not because he needed the reminder. He would not forget that name in this lifetime, but because seeing it written in his own hand made it real in a way that kept him from sliding back into grief. Grief was passive. Grief was a man sitting at a table in the dark. What Wyatt was doing now had a different texture entirely. He had a name, he had a location, Omaha, at least as a starting point. He had the station master's description of a man known to local rail personnel, and he had 4 letters pressed so faintly into the back of a note that he nearly missed them. Help. He did not let himself think too hard about what those 4 letters meant, what state she had been in when she wrote them. whether she had been frightened, earned, whether someone had been standing close enough that she could only manage 4 letters before she had to stop, earned. He did not let himself go there because if he went there, the thing that replaced grief would become something harder to manage than grief, and he needed to think clearly. He wrote to the Pinkerton office in Denver on a Monday, earned. By Thursday, a man named Harlan Cross rode up to his gate. Cross was not what Wyatt had expected. He was perhaps 40, thin in the face, with careful eyes and the kind of stillness that either meant a man was very calm or very dangerous, and in Cross's case appeared to be both. You're looking for a woman, Cross said, sitting across Wyatt's kitchen table with a mug of coffee. And no notebook, he kept everything in his head, he said, and a man named Whitmore. I'm looking for a woman, Wyatt said. Whitmore is how I find her. Tell me about Whitmore. I don't know much. Station master in Omaha said he runs land speculation. Said he was known to local rail personnel, which I'm reading as a polite way of saying he operates in railroad circles, and people have noticed him for the wrong reasons. Cross nodded slowly. Caleb Whitmore. He said the name the way you say a name you recognize. That's interesting. Wyatt went still. You know him? I know of him. He's been connected to 3 or 4 complaints over the last 2 years, mostly property fraud, inheritance manipulation. Nothing that stuck. He's careful. Cross set down his mug. He targets estates in transition, families dealing with illness, death, financial pressure. He finds the vulnerable point and he leans on it. The room was very quiet. Amelia's father was ill, Wyatt said. Tell me about the family situation. So Wyatt told him everything. He pulled out the letters and read the relevant sections: her father's failing health, the brothers who had left and sent nothing back, the small house that was probably going to have to be sold. He read the parts where she talked about the property, the land her father owned, modest but not nothing, and the question of what would happen to it after he was gone. Cross listened without interrupting. When Wyatt finished, Cross was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Whitmore got to her before she got on the train, or he got to her on the train. Either way, he knew enough about her situation to know she was moving west to marry a stranger, which means he knew enough about her to have been watching her for a while. Wyatt's jaw tightened. He targeted her, almost certainly. And the question is what he told her to make her stop. Cross paused. Because whatever he said, she believed it enough to leave her bag behind and walk away from the station. Wyatt put the letters down. He looked at Cross directly. What would make her believe he was telling the truth? A man like Whitmore? He'd have had something, a letter, a document, something she couldn't immediately disprove. Cross picked up his mug again. He'd have told her something about you, about me. Something that made you look like the wrong choice. Something that made walking away feel like the only option. Wyatt thought about that for a long moment. He thought about what a man like Whitmore could have said about him. He thought about what it would take to convince a woman who had spent 4 months carefully corresponding with a man, carefully, deliberately, with both eyes open, to suddenly believe that man was not what he seemed. Find him, Wyatt said. I intend to, Cross said. But I want to be clear about something first. He leaned forward slightly. If Whitmore is the woman, her name is Amelia. If Whitmore has Amelia, this is not a simple matter of finding her and bringing her back. A man like this has legal cover for everything he does. He'll have paperwork. He'll have explanations. If she's in his orbit by what looks, on paper, like her own choice. Then what, Wyatt said. What are you telling me? I'm telling you that finding her is only the first part of the problem. The second part is getting her out without giving Whitmore grounds to bring any kind of legal action against either of us. Cross studied him. I need you to be patient. I've been patient, Wyatt said. I need you to keep being patient. It was the hardest thing anyone had asked of him in years. But Wyatt Callahan looked at the man across the table and understood that Cross was right. The way a man understands things he does not want to be true. And he said, all right. But I want to know everything you find, everything. You do not filter it, agreed, Cross said. He shook Wyatt's hand and rode back toward town, and Wyatt stood at the gate watching him go and thought, she is somewhere, and she is alive, and she is Amelia Bennett, which means she is not waiting around to be rescued. And he did not know how right he was. And Amelia Bennett had been in the town of Harlow Creek, Wyoming for 6 weeks when she finally admitted to herself that she was not leaving. And not yet. Not because she did not want to, but because wanting to leave and being able to leave were two different things. And she was learning more painfully and more quickly than she had ever learned anything, that between those two things was a distance that could not be closed by wanting alone. She had arrived in Harlow Creek with 37 cents, the clothes she was wearing, and a level of fury that she had not known she was capable of. And the fury was at herself, because she had believed him. And she had stood in the corridor of a train car outside Omaha, and she had listened to Caleb Whitmore, a man she had twice at church socials in Ohio, a man who had always smiled just a half-second too late, and who her father had called well-connected, with a tone that meant something she had not fully understood, and she had listened to him tell her that Wyatt Callahan was a fraud, and he had documents. That was the part she could not get past, even 6 weeks later. And he had documents. And a letter supposedly from someone who had worked on Wyatt's ranch, and describing a man who had run through 3 mail order arrangements in 2 years, and each one ending badly, and one woman having returned east in what the letter described as a state of distress. And he had a newspaper clipping. She had not been able to read all of it. He had held it rather than letting her hold it. But she had seen the name Callahan in the headline and something about a legal dispute over land. And he had said, and with that half-second smile, and I knew your father, Amelia. And he asked me to look after you. I'm doing this because he would have wanted you to know. Her father, who was dying, who had raised her to be careful and to trust the right people. And she had believed him for 45 minutes. 45 minutes. And in that time, she had made a decision that she spent the next 6 weeks trying to live with. And she had written the note in a panic 7 words because she could not think of more, because her hands were shaking and she did not know what else to say. And she had pressed those 4 extra letters into the back of it before she fully understood why, only knowing that something felt desperately wrong and she had no one to tell. And she had left the bag because she had no choice. Whitmore was waiting, telling her the next train was leaving, telling her she needed to make a decision now. And by the time they reached Harlow Creek, she understood that she had made a catastrophic mistake. Not the mistake of leaving Wyatt. She still did not know whether Wyatt was who his letters said he was. But the mistake of trusting Whitmore. She understood it the moment he told her, in a voice that had lost all its church social courtesy, that her father's property in Ohio was currently the subject of a debt claim that Whitmore had the resources to handle, provided she was willing to sign over a portion of the estate management to his firm. He had not brought her west to protect her. He had brought her west to isolate her. I need to think about this, she had said, with a calm that surprised her even as she produced it. And of course, Whitmore had said, but the debt comes due in 30 days. He had set her up in a room above a dry goods store in Harlow Creek and left her there with $5, and the name of the man who owned the store, who she understood immediately was connected to Whitmore in some way she could not yet prove. And he had ridden back toward wherever a man like Whitmore went when he was not rearranging other people's lives to suit his own purposes. She sat in that room for 1 hour. Then she went downstairs and asked the store owner if he was hiring. He was not. She went to the next establishment and asked the same question. The answer was no 3 more times before a woman named Ruth Hadley, who ran a small eating house 2 blocks from the rail station, said, can you cook? I can learn, Amelia said. Ruth Hadley looked at her for a long moment, the careful, measuring look of a woman who had been underestimated enough times to develop a talent for recognizing other women who had also been underestimated, and said, $5 a week and your meals. You sleep here or you find your own place. Here, Amelia said. Please. She started the next morning. Ruth Hadley was 62 years old, had been widowed twice, and ran her establishment with the focused efficiency of someone who had learned that sentiment was a luxury and competence was a necessity. She did not ask Amelia how she had ended up in Harlow Creek. She asked whether she could carry 4 plates at once, and whether she had strong enough hands for bread dough. Amelia could carry 4 plates. Her hands were strong enough. Within 2 weeks, Ruth trusted her with the morning shift alone. Within a month, Amelia was managing the orders. tracking the inventory, and had quietly identified 3 places where Ruth's supplier was overcharging her. You have a head for numbers, Ruth said one evening, going over the books with the expression of a woman who had just found money she didn't know she had. My father taught me, Amelia said. Ruth looked at her over the rims of her glasses. Where's your father now? Ohio, he's ill. And where should you be? And it was asked simply, without accusation, but it landed like a stone in still water. And Montana, Amelia said. It was the first time she had said it out loud to anyone. And I was going to Montana. What happened? Amelia was quiet for a moment. And then she said, a man lied to me. And I believed him, and I made a decision I cannot take back. Ruth set down her pen. Can't take back or won't. And what's the difference? The difference, Ruth said, is that can't means you're stuck and won't means you've made a choice. And I want to know which one it is. Amelia thought about Wyatt. And she thought about 47 letters. And she thought about a man she had never met. And whose handwriting she knew better than most people's faces. And who had described a house with a porch where you could see the mountains and had said, in a letter she had read so many times the paper was soft at the folds, I'm not asking you to trust a stranger. I'm asking you to let me earn it. She thought about the fact that she had no way of knowing whether the documents Whitmore showed her were real. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know which one it is. Ruth nodded slowly. Then that's what you need to find out. She needed money first. Not enough to leave, she could not yet afford to leave, and she was not even sure where she would go. She needed enough to pay someone to find out whether the debt claim on her father's property was real. She needed enough to write letters safely, not from Harlow Creek, where she did not know who else was connected to Whitmore, but from somewhere else, somewhere he was not watching. She worked with the focused, silent intensity of a woman, converting grief and humiliation into something useful. She was at the eating house before Ruth every morning. She was the last one to leave every night. She learned to cook 6 things she had not known before, learned to manage a crowd of hungry railroad workers at noon, learned to smile at men who were rude in ways that did not cost her anything, and to redirect the ones who needed redirecting with a quiet firmness that surprised even herself. She was changing. She could feel it happening the way you feel a weather change, not all at once, but in the small daily adjustments your body makes before your mind catches up. The woman who had stood in that train corridor in Omaha and believed a man because he said her father's name had been Young in a way that had nothing to do with age. She was not that woman anymore. She was something else, something harder and clearer and more her own. 3 weeks in, Whitmore came back. She heard about it before she saw him. Ruth's store owner connection mentioned to a customer that Mr. Whitmore was in town, and the customer repeated it to another customer. And by the time Amelia heard it, it had passed through 4 mouths. She had 3 minutes of warning. She used them. She went into the back room, stood at the small window that looked out onto the alley, and thought very carefully about what she was going to do. She had 2 choices. She could avoid him, stay in the back, send Ruth out front, or she could face him. The woman in the train corridor would have hidden. Amelia walked out to the front of the eating house and sat down at the counter. Whitmore came in 12 minutes later. He was dressed well. As always, she noticed now with the clarity of hindsight that his clothing was always slightly too good for wherever he actually was, which was the mark of a man who was always performing rather than living. He saw her immediately, and something moved across his face too quickly to name. Amelia, he said, you look well. Mr. Whitmore, she said. Sit down. I'll get you coffee. He sat, he watched her with those careful eyes while she poured, and she felt the weight of his watchfulness without letting it show. I've been thinking about your offer, she said, setting the cup in front of him. And he had the controlled anticipation of a man who expects to win. I need to see the debt documentation again, she said. The original papers. Not a copy of the originals, with the creditor's signature and filing date. Pause, small but there. That's a reasonable request, he said. And I thought so. She looked at him directly. I also need the name of the creditor and the county where it was filed, so my father's attorney can verify it. Another pause. Longer this time. Your father has an attorney? Every man with property has an attorney, Mr. Whitmore. She did not look away. You know that better than anyone. The thing that moved across his face this time she did name. It was recalculation. And the quiet, rapid recalculation of a man who has just realized the position he thought he had is not quite as secure as he believed. And I'll have the document sent, he said. When? 2 weeks. And 1 week, Amelia said pleasantly. I'm sure a man with your resources can manage 1 week. And he left 30 minutes later, and Amelia went into the back room and gripped the edge of the work table with both hands and breathed until her hands stopped shaking. And Ruth appeared in the doorway. That was Whitmore? Ruth said. And it was not a question. Yes. Ruth paused. He's not going to send any documents. I know, Amelia said. Earned. Which means he's going to come back with a different approach. And I know that too. Amelia straightened up. Let go of the table. I need to write some letters. Use my address, Ruth said immediately. And Amelia looked at her. Ruth said, I wasn't always a cook. And it was the first personal thing Ruth Hadley had ever said to her, and it was enough. And she wrote 4 letters that night. And the first was to a woman in Ohio she had trusted since childhood, a school teacher named Vera Croft, who had known her family for 30 years and who she believed was outside Whitmore's reach. And she asked Vera to go to the county recorder's office and check whether any debt claim had been filed against her father's property. And the second letter was harder to write. She sat with a blank piece of paper for 20 minutes before she started. She did not write to Wyatt directly. And she did not yet know enough. She did not know whether the documents Whitmore had shown her were fabricated, did not know whether Wyatt was who his letters said he was, and she was no longer in the business of believing things without verification. But she wrote to the correspondence agency in Chicago, asking them to confirm Wyatt Callahan's registration and to tell her truthfully, clinically, whether any complaints had been filed against him. She needed the truth before she could do anything with it. And the third letter was to her father. Short, careful. And she told him she was safe, told him she had been delayed, did not tell him where she was or why. And she told him she loved him and that she was handling things. And she sat for a long time before writing the fourth letter. And then she wrote to the Harlow Creek town clerk, requesting a list of all business filings in the county associated with a man named Caleb Whitmore. And she folded all 4 letters, sealed them, and gave them to Ruth. And the morning rider, Ruth said, please. Ruth held the letters for a moment, looking at Amelia with that careful measuring expression. And, you know, she said, when you walked in here 6 weeks ago asking for work, I thought you were one of those women who had run away from something. And I had, Amelia said. No, Ruth said, I was wrong about that. And you weren't running away. You were running towards something. And you just hadn't figured out what yet. Amelia thought about that for a long time after Ruth went to bed. And she thought about Montana, about a man with careful handwriting who had described a house with a porch where you could see the mountains. And she thought about the fact that she was not the woman who had boarded a train in Ohio anymore. That woman had wanted to be chosen, wanted to arrive and be received, wanted to step into a life that was already built. And what she wanted now was different. She wanted to build something. And she wanted to really know, not because a stranger had handed her a document and invoked her father's name, whether the man in those letters was someone worth building it with. And she went to sleep. She woke at 4:30 and went downstairs and started the bread. And she was still there, and flour on her hands, and the first light coming through the window. And when Ruth came down an hour later and said, you're going to be all right, you know. And I know, Amelia said. And for the first time since the train, she meant it. The weeks that followed were a different kind of hard. Whitmore did not send the documents. She had not expected him to. But he sent something else. A man not himself. But a quiet, slope-shouldered man who appeared in town 1 week after Whitmore's visit and did not appear to be doing anything in particular, but was always there, at the edge of the market, across from the eating house at noon, outside the post office on the days that riders came through. Watching, Amelia told Ruth. Ruth said, I see him, and he's making sure I don't leave. Can you leave? Amelia thought about it carefully. She had money now, not much, but enough for a ticket. She knew the train schedule. She could, in theory, go to the station early one morning before the watching man was positioned. But she did not yet have her answers. Not yet, she said. Earned. Then we keep working, Ruth said, and went back to her stove. Earned. The answer from Vera Croft came 12 days later. Amelia was serving the noon rush when Ruth appeared at the kitchen door with a look on her face that made Amelia set down every plate she was carrying and walk directly to the back. Earned. Ruth handed her the letter. She read it standing up, still in her apron, flour on one forearm. Earned. Vera had gone to the county recorder's office. She had checked. Earned. She had even had her brother, who was a lawyer in Columbus, verify the search. Earned. There was no debt claim on the Bennett property. There had never been a debt claim on the Bennett property. Earned. Caleb Whitmore had lied. Amelia read the letter twice. Earned. Then she folded it and put it in her apron pocket and stood very still for a moment. She was not surprised. She had suspected as much for weeks. Earned. But knowing it was different from suspecting it. Earned. Knowing it meant the things she had been holding herself back from the wanting. Earned. The grief of it. Earned. The knowledge of what she had walked away from was now fully, earned, irrevocably real. Earned. She had walked away from a man who had told her the truth in 47 letters. Earned. And she had believed a man who had lied in 20 minutes. Earned. She felt the weight of that settle on her shoulders. Earned. Not guilt, or not only guilt, something more complicated. Earned. The weight of the distance between who she had been and who she was now, and the knowledge that you cannot go back across that distance, only forward. Earned. She took the letter out of her pocket and read it one more time. Earned. Then she put it back. I need to go to the post office, she told Ruth. Earned. She had a second letter to check for, the one from the correspondence agency in Chicago. Earned. It was waiting for her. She stood outside the post office and read it right there, in the cold morning air, because she could not wait. Earned. The agency confirmed Wyatt Callahan's registration. Earned. They confirmed his address, his ranch, his standing with the agency. Earned. They confirmed in the careful, measured language of an organization that understood exactly why someone might be asking that no complaints had ever been filed against him. Earned. That he had been a registered client for 7 months. Earned. That he had been, by their records, exactly who his letters said he was. Earned. She read it twice. Earned. Then she pressed both letters to her chest and stood very still in the cold air. Earned. And she did not cry. She did not do that. Earned. Not there. Earned. Not in a street where the watching man might be positioned somewhere, but something moved through her that was close enough to grief to be its twin. Earned. She had not lost him because he was a fraud. She had lost him because she had believed someone who told her he was. Earned. She walked back to the eating house. She sat down across from Ruth. Earned. She laid both letters on the table. Ruth read them without speaking. Earned. Set them down, looked at Amelia. So, Ruth said. So Amelia said, Earned. What are you going to do? Amelia looked at the letters. Earned. She thought about the house with the porch. She thought about the man who had written, I'm not asking you to trust a stranger. Earned. I'm asking you to let me earn it. She thought about a year, not a week, not a month, but a year of silence. Earned. She thought about what that silence might have meant to him. Earned. What he might have assumed, what might have happened to him in the time she had been here, learning to carry 4 plates at once and make bread dough and face down men who thought her situation made her helpless. Earned. She thought about whether she had the right to show up at all. Earned. I don't know if it's too late, she said. There's one way to find out, Ruth said. Earned. He might not want to see me. He might not. I left. He thinks I chose to leave. Then you explain that you didn't. And it's not that simple. No, Ruth said. It's not. And simple would have been staying on that train. She folded her hands on the table with the authority of a woman who had been widowed twice and was still sitting upright. And nothing worth having is simple. You know that now. And Amelia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I need to deal with Whitmore first. And Ruth raised an eyebrow. I'm not running, Amelia said. And not this time. If I leave now, he follows. He has a watching man in this town for a reason, and I want to know what it is before I go anywhere. She looked at Ruth steadily. And I want to make sure he can't follow me to Montana. And Ruth looked at her for a long time. Then she smiled, a rare thing, precise and genuine. And all right, she said, tell me what you need. And what she needed took 3 more weeks. In those 3 weeks, Amelia did 3 things. And she wrote to her father's old friend in Columbus, a man named Patterson, who had a reputation for handling exactly the kind of legal problem she now understood Whitmore to represent. And she told Patterson everything, the documents, The train, and the debt claim that did not exist, the watching man, She told him where she was and what Whitmore had been trying to do, and she asked him what could be done. Patterson wrote back within a week. He had already begun making inquiries. He would handle the Ohio end. He advised her to document everything she could about Whitmore's activities in Wyoming. He also told her something that made her sit very still when she read it. Whitmore had pulled this same scheme twice before, with two other women in similar circumstances, both of whom had eventually signed over estate management to his firm under circumstances that a careful attorney might describe as coercion. He had done this before. She was not the first. The fury that moved through her when she read that was clean and useful, and she did not waste it. She went to the town clerk and collected every public filing associated with Whitmore's name. She wrote down everything the watching man had done in her presence. She built a file, methodical and precise, the way she had learned from her father, the way she had been learning in Ruth's account books. When she was done, she gave a copy to Patterson's contact in Wyoming and kept one herself. And then on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 1 year, she realized, after the day she had not arrived at Red Valley Station, she packed the small bag Ruth had given her, said goodbye to Ruth Hadley with a ferocity of gratitude that she could not fully put into words, and walked to the train station in Harlow Creek. The watching man was there. She walked past him without hesitating, he took a step toward her. "I wouldn't," she said without breaking stride. "Mr. Patterson's office in Columbus has a complete record of every place I've been and everything your employer has done. If anything happens to me or if I'm delayed, that record goes directly to the Pinkerton Agency in Denver and the Territorial Marshal." She looked at him directly. "If you want to test that, go ahead." He did not follow her. She bought a ticket to Red Valley Station, Montana. She sat in the rail car with her hands flat on her knees, watching the landscape change through the window, and she thought about what she was going to say. She thought about the ways it might go wrong. She thought about what a year of silence looked like from his side, and whether any explanation she could offer would be enough. She thought about the woman who had left Ohio hoping to be received, and she thought about the woman sitting in this seat right now, who had learned the hard way, the only way some come, that you do not arrive at a life, you build it. She was not going to Montana to be Wyatt Callahan's bride. She was going to Montana to see whether two people who had been cheated out of a beginning could find one that was better than anything Caleb Whitmore's lies had tried to steal from them. She did not know what she would find. She did not know if he would be there. She did not know if he would want to see her, but she was going. And she was going as herself, not the girl from the letters, not the woman who had frozen in a train corridor and believed a lie, but someone new, built from everything in between. The train moved north. She kept her hands flat on her knees. She breathed. She was ready. Harlan Cross rode back to the Callahan Ranch on a Wednesday morning, 11 months after Wyatt had first hired him, and Wyatt knew the moment he saw the man's face that something had shifted. Not good news, not bad news, something more complicated than either. Wyatt met him at the gate. He did not invite him inside first. He stood there in the cold October air and said, "Tell me." "She's alive," Cross said. "She's in Wyoming, town called Harlow Creek." Wyatt grabbed the fence post with one hand just for a second. Then he let go. "Is she all right?" "She's more than all right." Cross said, and there was something in his voice that Wyatt had not heard before, a note of genuine surprise from a man who made his living being unsurprisable. "She's been working at an eating house. She's built herself a legal case against Whitmore. She's been corresponding with an attorney in Columbus." He paused. She figured most of it out herself. Wyatt was quiet for a moment. "Where is she now?" he said. "That's the thing," Cross said. "She left Harlow Creek 3 days ago. I was 2 days behind her the whole way." He looked at Wyatt steadily. "I think she's on a train to Montana." The cold air went still around them. "To Red Valley?" Wyatt said. "That would be my guess." Wyatt looked at him for one long second. Then he turned around and walked directly to the stable. Wyatt Cross called after him. "Invoice me," Wyatt said without turning around. "Whatever I owe you, add 10%. I need to tell you about Whitmore. And later, Wyatt said, all of it later. And he saddled his horse in 4 minutes, which was fast even for him, and rode out of the gate at a pace that made Dolph, who was coming in from the north pasture, pull his own horse up short and stare. Where in the hell Dolph started? Red Valley, Wyatt called back. Dolph sat on his horse and watched Wyatt disappear down the road, and he took off his hat, and he said to no one in particular, well, finally, Wyatt had ridden to Red Valley Station enough times in the past year that his horse knew the road, but he had never ridden it like this, not with grief, not with the careful measured hope he had been rationing out to himself in small doses for 11 months. He rode it now with something he could not name because he had not felt it in long enough that he had forgotten the word for it. He did not know what train she was on. He did not know what time she would arrive. He did not know if Cross was right about where she was going. And he was aware, in some clear-eyed part of his mind, that the rest of him was trying to shout down, that he could arrive at that station and stand on that platform again and watch every passenger walk off and be standing there alone at the end of it. He knew that. He held it in his mind because he was Wyatt Callahan, and he did not lie to himself about the edges of things. And he rode anyway. He arrived at Red Valley Station at noon. The next train from the south was due at 2. He tied his horse, went inside, and found Gerald at the station master's window. Gerald looked up, looked at Wyatt's face, and said, in the tone of a man who had learned to read human situations the way other men read weather, you're not here for supplies. No, Wyatt said, same situation as last year? Different, Wyatt said. Same print reason. Gerald nodded slowly. 2 o'clock train. If she's on it, she's on it. If she's not, then I'll wait for the next one, Wyatt said. Gerald nodded again and said nothing else, which was exactly the right thing to do. Wyatt sat down on the bench in the waiting room. He did not have a package under his arm this time. He had not brought gloves. He had not pressed his shirt or polished his boots. He had ridden here the way a man rides when the thinking is done, and the only thing left is the going fast and direct and without ceremony. He sat with his hat in his hands. He waited. The 2 o'clock train was 7 minutes late. Those 7 minutes were the longest Wyatt had spent since the night he sat in his dark kitchen and read 7 words on a piece of paper and felt the bottom drop out of something he had barely let himself believe in. He heard the whistle. He stood up. He walked out to the platform. He had told himself on the ride over that he was going to be calm, that whatever happened, he was going to be the steady, measured man that 11 months of hard winters and harder silence had hammered him into being, that he was not going to fall apart regardless of what came off that train or didn't. He lasted about 10 seconds on the platform before he understood that calm was not going to be available to him today. The train came in, the doors opened, people began to step off, and he watched every face with an intensity that he was not bothering to conceal. A family of 4, a man in a traveling coat, 2 young men who were clearly ranch hands returning from somewhere, and an older woman with a carpet bag, 3 more men, a young woman with red hair who was not her. Stream of passengers was thinning. Wyatt's jaw tightened, and then she stepped off the train. He recognized her before he consciously processed what he was seeing, the way you recognize something your whole body has been tuned to find. Dark hair, a composed, self-contained way of moving that was both familiar from the letters and entirely different from anything he had imagined. She was scanning the platform with the careful eyes of a woman who had learned to read rooms quickly, and she had not yet looked in his direction. She was helping someone, an older woman, who had gotten off the train ahead of her and was struggling with a large bag. Amelia had the bag in one hand and her own small case in the other, and she was saying something to the older woman with an ease that looked like a habit. Then the older woman went her way, and Amelia straightened up, and she looked across the platform. And she saw him. The moment stretched. Neither of them moved. Wyatt had imagined this moment on the bad nights and the good nights in many different versions. He had imagined saying something precise and honest that perfectly expressed 11 months of searching. He had imagined being cooler than he felt or warmer. He had imagined having the right words ready. He had no words. She had gone pale. He could see it from 20 feet away, the color leaving her face, not in fear, but in something that looked like the physical shock of an impact. The kind of shock that happens when something you have been bracing for finally arrives, and the bracing turns out not to have been enough. She took one step toward him. Then she stopped. He crossed the platform. He stopped 3 feet from her. This close, he could see everything that a year had put into her face. Not damage, or not only damage, something harder than that and better. The look of a person who has been tested and has not collapsed, and knows it now, and carries the knowledge of it the way you carry a scar, present, permanent, and no longer something you flinch from. Wyatt, she said, his name in her voice for the first time. He had read his own name in her handwriting 47 times, and this was different in every way it was possible for something to be different. Amelia, he said. They stood there for a moment that was too full of things to hold. Then she said, "You're here. I've been looking for you for 11 months, he said. Where else would I be? Her chin moved, just slightly. The way a person's chin moves when they are deciding whether to hold something together or let it go. I thought she started. Whitmore told me, I know what Whitmore told you, Wyatt said. His voice was steady. He had decided, on the ride over, that whatever happened in this conversation, he was not going to let her carry one more second of the weight of a lie that was not hers. I know everything he told you, and I know none of it was true. She looked at him. How long have you known, she asked. About the lie? 7 months, about where you were 3 days. You knew for 7 months that something happened to you. That someone told you something that made you believe you couldn't come. He held her gaze. I didn't know where you were. I hired a Pinkerton man. He found you in Harlow Creek, but you'd already left by the time he got there. She absorbed this. I was coming here, she said. I was on my way here. I know, he said, I need you to understand that I wasn't running away. I thought I was protecting, she stopped. Try it again. He said you had done this before. He had documents. He had Amelia. His voice was quiet and direct and left no room for anything but the truth. You don't owe me an explanation for believing a man who had documents and invoked your dying father's name. That's not a failure. That's being human. Something in her face broke and remade itself in the span of a second. I should have trusted the letters, she said. Maybe, but you're here now. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very carefully, like a woman who has learned to be precise about what she asks for, what does here now mean? I need to know what you mean by that. I'm not going to assume. And there it was. That was the thing he had read in 47 letters and had not been able to fully picture until this moment, the woman who said what she meant and needed the other person to do the same. Who would not let a vague kindness stand in for an actual answer because she had learned what vagueness cost. He respected it so much it almost undid him. It means, he said, that I'd like to start over. If you're willing. Not pick up where we left off. There's no going back to where we were. But start over. From here. From what we both know now, which is more than we knew then. She looked at him for a long moment. You don't know me, she said. Not really. You know the woman in the letters. I know she's standing in front of me, he said. And I know she got herself out of whatever Whitmore put her in without waiting for anyone to come get her. That tells me more than 4 months of letters. You're not angry, she said. It came out sounding almost like a question. I'm furious at Whitmore, he said. At you? He shook his head. Not for 1 minute. She closed her eyes. Just for a second. When she opened them, there was something different in her face, not relief, exactly. Something quieter and more foundational than relief. Like a thing that had been braced against pressure, finally being allowed to simply exist. I'm different, she said. I need you to know that. I'm not who I was in those letters. Good, Wyatt said. I'm not who I was in those letters either. She looked at him for another moment. Then she said, with the smallest possible curve at the corner of her mouth, you came to the station. I told you. I've been looking for 11 months. It wasn't going to stop. Why not? She asked it the way she asked everything directly, wanting the real answer, not the comfortable one. Wyatt thought about the dark kitchen, The note in his pocket that he had carried every day for 11 months. The piece of paper that said help in letters so faint he had almost missed them. Because something in those 7 words didn't sound like you, he said. And I couldn't let go of that. She stared at him. You kept the note, she said slowly. I kept everything. She pressed her lips together, and then she said in a voice that was very controlled and very clear, he stopped me before I could finish it. I started to write more. I had already written the other word on the back, and he said the train was leaving and I had to decide. I found it, Wyatt said. The other word. She looked up at him. I found it 7 months ago, he said. That's when I hired Cross. The silence between them had a different quality now. Not the silence of 2 strangers measuring each other. Something more settled, something that recognized itself. So she said finally. So he said, what do we do now? He picked up the small case. She was still holding the one she had not put down. He realized, during the entire conversation, as if she had not yet let herself believe she was staying long enough to set it down. He held out his other hand. She looked at it for a moment, then she took it. They did not go anywhere romantic. There was no dramatic carriage ride into the sunset. Wyatt walked her to a small tea room near the station, the kind of practical, unglamorous choice a man makes when he understands that what the moment actually needs is not scenery but ground. They sat across from each other at a small table and ordered coffee they didn't really drink, and they talked for 3 hours. Not about Whitmore. Not yet. That was a conversation that needed a table and documents and probably a lawyer, and it was coming, but not today. They talked about the year. She told him about Ruth Hadley. She told him about the watching man and the confrontation and walking past him with her back straight and her heart hammering in her chest. She told him about the 4 letters and waiting for answers and what it felt like to read Vera Croft's letter confirming that the debt claim was fabricated. What did you do, Wyatt asked, when you read it? I stood in the back room of an eating house and held onto the edge of a work table, she said. And then I went to check my other letter, the one from the agency. Yes, she paused. You had no complaints against you. No, he said. I know that now. She stopped herself. I promised myself I wasn't going to spend this conversation apologizing. It's not useful and it doesn't change anything. He said. It doesn't. I made a bad decision based on false information, and I spent 11 months learning from it. She looked at him steadily. That's what happened. That's all I have to offer. That's enough, he said. She shook her head slightly. Don't make it easy just to make me comfortable. I'm not making it easy, he said. I'm telling you the truth. What you did in Harlow Creek, building that case against Whitmore, protecting yourself, getting out, that required a kind of judgment and courage that I didn't know you had. I thought I was looking for the woman from the letters. I found someone better. She looked at him for a long moment. That's a lot to say to someone you just met, she said. We've been writing to each other for over a year, he said. That's not the same as meeting? No, it's not. He held her gaze. But it's not nothing either. She was quiet, turning her coffee cup slowly in her hands. Then she said, tell me about the year, your side of it. So he did. He told her about the dark kitchen and the note and the cold thing that moved through him when he held her bag. He told her about Dolph's speech at the kitchen table, the one about how grief just gets better at waiting than you do, and she almost smiled at that. He told her about the letters he sent that came back unopened, the doors that led nowhere, the months of working 17 hours a day, trying to outrun something that was perfectly comfortable waiting. And he told her about Cross. He told her about the name Whitmore, and the moment he understood that she had not left because she wanted to. And what did it feel like, she asked, when you understood that? And he thought about it honestly, like the difference between losing something and having it taken from you. And they're both painful, but they're not the same pain. She nodded slowly. That's exactly right. And the second one is easier to act on, he said. And she looked at him. Because it has a direction. Yes, he said. It has a direction. The conversation about Whitmore came later that evening at the hotel where Wyatt arranged a room for her. When Cross appeared at the door with his careful eyes and his unreadable face and spread his documents on the table. Amelia sat across from Cross, and she was not the woman who had stood in a train corridor and believed what she was told. She pulled her own documents from the case she had been carrying since Harlow Creek, the file she had built. Methodical and precise, and she laid them beside Cross's, and Cross looked at them, and then looked at her with something that was almost respect. "These are good," he said. "Thank you," she said, without any particular emotion. She had not built them for a compliment. She had built them because they were necessary. "Patterson in Columbus is already moving on the Ohio side," Cross said. "With what you have here and what I have, we can keep Whitmore away from your father's estate and probably from you permanently. There are 2 prior victims willing to testify." He paused. "He made a mistake with you. He underestimated her," Wyatt said. "He underestimated what a year would do to her," Cross corrected, and Amelia thought that was the more accurate version and liked Cross for it. They worked through the documents for 2 hours. When Cross left, Wyatt walked him to the door and came back and found Amelia sitting in the chair with her hands in her lap, looking at the middle distance with the expression of someone who has finished a very long task and has not yet decided what to do with the absence of it. "It's almost over," Wyatt said. "Almost," she agreed. "How does that feel?" She thought about it. "Strange. I've been building toward this for so long that I don't quite know what comes after." "That's the part I'd like to have a say in," Wyatt said, "if you'll let me." She looked at him. "Come to the ranch," he said. I'm not asking you to marry me tonight. I'm not asking you to make any decision tonight. Come see the place, see the porch, decide what you think of it." He paused. "You asked me in one of your letters whether the water ran good. It does, like to show you." Something moved through her face that was entirely private and entirely real. "You remember that letter," she said. "I remember all of them." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The porch where you can see the mountains. On clear days. Is it a clear day tomorrow?" "This time of year," he said. "Most days are." She looked at her hands. Then she looked at him. And for the first time since she had stepped off that train, she let herself fully feel what it meant to be in this room, in this conversation, with this man, the man who had written 47 letters and kept every one of hers, and hired a detective and ridden to a station for the second time, because he could not let go of the fact that 7 words did not sound like her. "All right," she said. "I'll come." He nodded. He did not make it into more than it was. He understood she had been reading him all evening, measuring whether he would hold his shape under pressure, that what she needed was a man who could take yes for the answer it was, without turning it into something he could decorate. "I'll meet you at 8, he said. "There's a wagon." 8, she said. He picked up his hat. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and turned back. "Amelia," he said. She looked up. "For what it's worth," he said. "You were right to check, to verify, to not take my word for it just because I'd been saying the right things." He held her gaze. "That's not a flaw. That's sense. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." She stared at him. He left. She sat in the chair for a long time after the door closed. She thought about a woman who had wanted to arrive at a life already built. She thought about the woman she was now, who understood that you do not arrive at a life. You examine it carefully. You verify the foundations. You ask the hard questions and you wait for answers that hold up in the light. And then if the answers hold, you build. She thought about the porch. She thought about the mountains on clear days. She thought about tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock and the fact that she was not afraid of it. She was ready for it. She went to the window. Outside in the cold, clear October dark, she could see nothing beyond the town lights. But somewhere north of here, past the rail lines and the open land, there was a ranch with a quiet house and a porch, and a man who had kept 47 letters and ridden to a station twice. She was not there yet, but she was going, and this time nothing was going to stop her. She was ready at 7:45, not because she was anxious or not only because of that, because she had spent a year getting up before anyone else, and the habit had become part of her, the way all the necessary things had become part of her during those months in Harlow Creek. Early rising, precise thinking, the refusal to wait passively for anything. She was standing outside the hotel with her small case when Wyatt pulled the wagon around at 8 o'clock exactly. He saw her standing there and something moved across his face that he did not try to conceal. She noticed that about him he did not perform his reactions. They arrived on his face the way weather arrived, real and unannounced. "You're early," he said. "So are you," she said. He climbed down and took her case without asking, which she noted was not the same as taking over. He put it in the wagon bed and held out a hand to help her up to the seat. She took it. His hand was rough in the way that 11 years of ranch work makes hands rough. And she had known that from the letters he had mentioned it once, apologetically, and she had written back that she did not see how that was anything to apologize for. He climbed up beside her. They sat close enough that she was aware of the distance and the absence of it. He clicked his tongue at the horses. They rode out of Red Valley Station as the morning light came in clean and cold, and neither of them said anything for a while, and the silence was not uncomfortable. That was the thing she kept noticing. With a man like Caleb Whitmore, silence had always felt like a thing being managed like quiet was just the space between his next move. With Wyatt, silence felt like two people breathing at the same pace. After a while, she said, "Tell me about the hands." "Dolph you've heard about," he said. "He'll pretend he wasn't waiting to meet you, but he's been asking about you since the day I rode back from the station last year." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That something had happened and I didn't know what, but I wasn't ready to accept it as a closed matter." She looked at the road ahead. "What made you sure enough to keep going?" He was quiet for a moment. "7 words," he said. And 4 more on the back. She did not say anything. But her hands, which were folded in her lap, tightened slightly. "The other 2 hands are younger," he continued. "Pete Soren, 23, works hard and talks too much. Will Greer, 26, works hard and talks too little. Between them, they average out to about right." He paused. "They don't know your full story?" "Dolph does." "How much does Dolph know?" "Everything," Wyatt said. "I don't keep things from Dolph." "It doesn't work anyway," he finds out. She almost smiled. "And what does Dolph think?" "Dolph thinks," Wyatt said carefully, "that you showing up here under your own power, having done what you did in Harlow Creek, is considerably more interesting than if you'd arrived on schedule a year ago." She turned to look at him. "Did he actually say that?" "More or less. Dolph has his own way of saying things." "I think I'm going to like Dolph," she said. "He's going to like you," Wyatt said. "He already does, based purely on the file you built against Whitmore. He made me read him the list of documents." This time she did smile. She felt it happen and did not try to contain it. "I didn't build it to impress anyone." "That's why it's impressive," Wyatt said. The ranch appeared in the distance after another 20 minutes of riding, and Wyatt watched her from the corner of his eye as it came into view, not to manage her reaction, but because he found he genuinely wanted to know what she thought. He had described it accurately in his letters. He had not romanticized it. He had told her about the cold and the work and the quiet. But there was a difference between describing a place and arriving at it. She looked at it steadily. "The porch faces west," he said. "I know. You wrote that. You can't see the mountains this morning." "Cloud cover came in overnight." "I didn't come for the mountains," she said. He looked at her. "I came to see the place," she said. "All of it. Not just the view." He drove through the gate. Dolph was not in the yard, which meant Dolph was very deliberately not in the yard, which meant Dolph was somewhere nearby, trying to look like he had always been planning to be there. Wyatt appreciated the effort even while seeing through it completely. He helped her down from the wagon. She did not wait for him. She was already stepping down as he came around. So it was less him helping her and more him being there in case she needed it, which felt about right. She stood in the yard and looked at the house. "It's exactly how you described it," she said. "I tried to be accurate." "You were." She turned slowly, taking in the yard, the outbuildings, the fence line, not the eyes of a woman evaluating real estate, the eyes of a woman calculating the work involved and what kind of person would have done it. "You've been maintaining this alone?" "Dolph and the boys do the stock. I do most of the rest." "The accounting? Me? The purchasing?" "Me," she nodded slowly. He could see her thinking, the same way he thought, not quickly, and then deciding but thoroughly, and then being certain. "I'd like to see the books," she said. He blinked. "The ranch books?" "If you're willing." She looked at him directly. I helped Ruth run her accounts for almost a year. I found problems she didn't know she had. I'm not suggesting yours are wrong. Earned. I'm suggesting that a second set of eyes doesn't cost anything. Earned. He studied her for a moment. Then he said, all right. Earned. Today if you want. I want, she said. Earned. Dolph appeared approximately 4 minutes later, coming from the direction of the stable, with an expression of complete innocence that convinced no one. He was 61 years old, sun-darkened and wire-lean, with a handshake that he offered to Amelia the moment he reached her, direct and without ceremony. Miss Bennett, he said. Mr. McCready, she said. Wyatt tells me you've been following the Whitmore situation. Dolph's eyebrows went up slightly. He had not expected her to go there immediately. I have, he said. What's your read on it? He looked at her for a moment with those careful, weathered eyes. Then he looked at Wyatt. Wyatt gave him nothing deliberately because he wanted to see what Dolph would do with her on his own terms. Dolph looked back at Amelia. My read, he said, is that a man who runs that kind of scheme on women in transit has been doing it long enough to be comfortable with it. Which means he's either going to come at you legally to protect himself, or he's going to do something stupid because he's angry you outmaneuvered him. He paused. I'd prepare for both. Amelia nodded. That's exactly what I think. Dolph looked at Wyatt again. This time his expression said very clearly, she'll do. Wyatt looked back at him. His expression said, I know. She looked at the books that afternoon. Wyatt spread everything across the kitchen table. His ledgers going back 3 years, his purchase records, his contracts with the 2 cattle buyers who took his steers at the fall market. He sat across from her and watched her go through it with the same quality of attention she brought to everything. Systematic, unhurried, missing nothing. She did not say anything for almost an hour. Then she said, who's your buyer for the spring calves? Man named Garrett out of Miles City. What's your arrangement? Fixed price per head, agreed in January, settled at delivery in June. She turned the ledger toward him and pointed. For the last 3 years, Garrett's price has been below the regional average for spring delivery by between 8 and 12%. Wyatt looked at the numbers. I know the regional average from Ruth's supplier negotiations, she said. She had me research market prices last winter. I looked at cattle as part of that different market, same principles. She paused. You're not being robbed, but you're not getting what your stock is worth either. Wyatt looked at the numbers for a long moment. Then he said, you got that from a year of running an eating house? From a year of paying attention, she said. He sat back in his chair. He thought about the woman in those letters who had said she wanted to be useful to someone. He had read that as a modest ambition, a woman who wanted to contribute to matter. He understood now that he had underread it. She had not meant she wanted to be decorative or compliant or present. She had meant she wanted to actually do something, and she had spent a year learning how to do more than she had known how to do before. What would you suggest? He said. Talk to 2 other buyers before January, she said. Get competing offers. Then go back to Garrett. She closed the ledger. You're a loyal customer. Use that. It has value. And if Garrett won't negotiate, then you have 2 other buyers. Simple, direct, no drama. He looked at her across the table. She had flour on her sleeve from where she had leaned against the table. He did not know how it had gotten there. Some remnant from this morning's bread that Dolph must have left, and she had not noticed it, or had noticed and did not care. And either way, it was the most natural thing he had seen in a very long time. You'd want to do this, he said. The accounts. I'd want to do whatever is useful, she said. Don't ask me to arrange curtains. He did not mean to laugh. It came out anyway, a short, real sound that surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. No curtains, he said. Good, she said, and turned to the next ledger. The first week passed the way first weeks pass when 2 people are learning the shape of each other's daily life carefully, with a lot of attention and a few missteps and the occasional moment of unexpected ease that surprised them both. She slept in the spare room. That had not been discussed, it was simply understood. They were not starting from where they had planned to start a year ago. They were starting from somewhere more honest and considerably more complicated, and both of them were sensible enough to know it. She made herself useful without making it a performance. She helped with the morning cooking because she was awake before anyone else. The kitchen was there. She worked on the accounts in the afternoons. She asked questions about the stock operation, not the way a visitor asks questions, but the way someone asks who is trying to understand a system they may need to know. Pete Soren, the 23-year-old who talked too much and was visibly fascinated by her and visibly trying not to show it, which resulted in him talking even more than usual and about nothing in particular whenever she was in range. Will Greer, the one who talked too little, watched her with the quiet assessment of a man deciding whether a new element belongs in a structure he trusts, and said nothing for 4 days before coming to her one morning with a question about the feed inventory records that she answered in 2 minutes flat. After that, Will Greer treated her like she had always been there, which was the most complete form of acceptance she had encountered in months. Dolph watched all of it without commenting. Until the fourth evening, when he and Wyatt were sitting on the porch after supper, and Amelia had gone inside, and Dolph said, without preamble, "You're not going to let this drift, are you?" Wyatt looked at him. "I'm saying," Dolph said, "that you've been careful not to push." Which is right. But there's a difference between not pushing and just waiting for something to happen on its own. And I know which one you're doing, and I'm not sure it's the right call anymore. "She's been here 4 days, Wyatt said. "I know how long she's been here." Dolph turned his coffee mug in his hands. "She's also been through something that would have broken most people." She didn't break, but people who survive things the hard way sometimes need someone to tell them it's all right to stop surviving and just live. He paused. "I'm not saying rush her. I'm saying don't mistake patience for passivity." Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. "When did you get so wise?" he said. "I've always been this wise," Dolph said. "You just don't listen in the summer. You only listen when things get cold." On the 6th day, the letter arrived. It came through the Red Valley Post Rider, forwarded from the address Amelia had left with Patterson in Columbus, and it was from Vera Croft in Ohio. Amelia read it at the kitchen table while Wyatt was outside, and when he came in 20 minutes later, she was still sitting it open in front of her. He knew from the quality of her stillness that it was significant. "Your father?" he said, because that was the first possibility, and he needed to know immediately. "He's stable," she said. "Vera says he's been asking about me." She paused. "He knows I'm in Montana." "How, Vera?" Told him. She thought it would help him. Amelia looked at the letter. "She says he told her to tell me, and I'm directly tell her that man in Montana wrote me a letter in February saying he was going to find her." I believed him. "Tell her I was right." Wyatt was completely still. She looked up at him. "You wrote to my father." "February," he said. "I'd confirmed by then that Whitmore had gotten to you. I didn't have your father's address, but I wrote to the agency and they passed it on." He paused. "I told him what I knew, that you hadn't left by choice, that I was looking." "He never told me," she said. Maybe he was waiting for the right moment. Maybe Vera made that judgment call. He held her gaze. "Are you upset that I did that?" She looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said, and it was the most unambiguous thing she had said in 6 days. "No, I'm not upset." She looked back at the letter. "He says to tell you thank you." "He doesn't need to." "He wants to." She folded the letter carefully. "He's not well. He won't be. Vera says he's comfortable, but it's a matter of time." She set the letter down flat on the table. "I should go back to see him." "Yes," Wyatt said immediately. She looked up. "When you're ready," he said, "I'll arrange whatever you need. If you want someone to go with you, I'll go. If you want to go alone, I'll be here when you get back." He said it simply, without making it a negotiation. "Whatever you need." She stared at him. "You'd go with me?" she said. "To Ohio." "If you wanted me there," he said. "Yeah." Something moved through her face that she did not try to name or contain. It was too big and too varied relief and grief and gratitude and something else underneath all of it. Something she had been holding very carefully for 6 days because she did not yet trust whether it was real or whether it was just the proximity of safety making her feel things she was not certain she had earned the right to feel. She stood up. She stood up and she walked to where he was standing 3 steps. That was all, and she put her arms around him. Not dramatically, not as a collapse. Earned. She held him the way a person holds on to something they have been walking toward for a very long time and have finally reached. And the walking has been hard enough that the arrival is a full-body experience, not just an emotion. And his arms came around her, solid, present, not tight enough to be desperate, not loose enough to be uncertain. They stood like that for a while. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing that needed to be said that the standing wasn't already saying. And she left for Ohio 10 days later. Wyatt did not go not because he did not offer, but because she decided, after thinking about it clearly, that this particular thing was hers to do alone. She needed to sit with her father and be his daughter, without also being someone else's almost wife, at least for that conversation. She needed to handle the last pieces of the legal matter with Patterson in person. And she was honest with herself about this to make her choice about Montana from the clarity of distance, not from the warmth of proximity. Because she liked it there. She liked the work and the straightforwardness of the accounts and the way Will Greer had started including her in the stock conversation and the way Dolph made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in and the way Wyatt moved through a day like man who had learned that endurance and stubbornness were in the end the same quality. She liked it more than she had liked anything in years. And she was careful enough to know that liking something is not the same as knowing it is right. Wyatt drove her to the station. She had her case. She had her file on Whitmore, which she was bringing to Patterson. She had her father's letter. At the platform, she turned to face him. I'm coming back, she said. I know, he said. I'm not saying it to reassure you. I'm saying it because I want to be precise about it. She held his gaze. I'm coming back, I'd like to talk about what comes next. All of it. Practically. What it would actually look like. All right, he said. I'm not good at being vague about important things, she said. I know, he said. I've read your letters. She looked at him for a moment. Then she held out her hand. He took it. They shook hands not romantically, but honestly, the way two people close a real agreement. She climbed onto the train. She sat at the window and looked out. He was still standing on the platform when the train began to move, hat in hand, watching her go with the patient steadiness of a man who had gotten very good at waiting for the right thing and had finally learned to trust that the right thing was worth the waiting. She held his gaze until the platform bent out of sight. Then she folded her hands in her lap. She breathed. Ohio was exactly as she had left it and entirely different. Her father's house had the bread smell she remembered and the slightly broken qualities she had described in her letters. And her father himself was thinner than she had expected, but sharper, more alert, more present than Vera's letters had led her to believe. He had the stubborn vitality of a man who had decided he was not going anywhere until certain things were resolved, and she suspected that seeing her was one of the things he had needed to resolve. He looked at her for a long time when she came through the door. You look different, he said. I am different, she said. Good different or hard different, both, she said. Same thing in the end. He nodded slowly. Sit down and tell me everything. So she did. She told him about Whitmore, all of it. Nothing softened. He listened without interrupting, which took visible effort, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Whitmore was at my house, he said. Twice while you were gone. Said he was checking on my welfare. She went very still. What did you tell him? I told him my welfare was none of his concern, and if he came back, I'd have him removed. He looked at her steadily. I didn't know what he'd done to you then, but I've never liked that man. Not once. You never told me you were grown. I thought you could judge people for yourself. His jaw tightened. I should have said something. Papa. She reached over and took his hand. You couldn't have known what he'd do? No. But I knew he was the kind of man who watches other people's things and waits. He looked at her. Tell me about Montana. Tell me about this Callahan. She told him. She told him about the letters and the station and the year, and the conversation on the platform and the kitchen table and the account books. She told him about the porch she had not yet seen on a clear day. Her father listened to all of it with the focused attention of a man who understood that this was not a story about romance, or not only that. This was a story about his daughter becoming someone, and he was old enough and wise enough to understand that the becoming mattered more than the destination. When she finished, he said he wrote to me, "I know." And he told me, in February, he said her father shifted slightly, reaching for the side table, pulling out a folded letter. And I kept it here. He held it out to her. She took it. And she unfolded it. Wyatt's handwriting. She would know it anywhere she had read it 47 times in letters addressed to her. But this one was addressed to her father, Mr. Bennett. "My name is Wyatt Callahan. And I believe you know why I'm writing. I want you to know that your daughter did not leave of her own choosing. And I do not yet know exactly what happened, but I am going to find out, and when I do, I intend to correct it. I don't know how much time you have, or how much Amelia has told you about our arrangement. I want to tell you only this. Whatever she decides, when this is over, will be entirely her choice. I will not pressure her, but I would not be the man she spent 4 months writing to if I let this go unanswered. She deserves an answer. I intend to give her one. Respectfully, Wyatt Callahan. She read it twice. She folded it carefully and placed it on her father's side table. She did not say anything for a moment. "He's a plain speaker," her father said. "Yes," she said. "Plain speakers are rare." "Yes," she said. "Are you going back?" He asked it directly, the way he had always asked things, no softening, no leading, just the question. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. He nodded. Not with relief, or not only that, with the satisfaction of a man who had raised someone capable of knowing her own mind and watching her use it. "Then go," he said. "Don't wait on my account." "I'm not leaving tomorrow," she said. "I know. But don't let worry about me keep you from a life." He squeezed her hand. "You've been waiting long enough. Both of you have." Patterson resolved the Whitmore matter in 11 days. With the file Amelia had built in Harlow Creek, the documentation Cross had assembled, and the 2 prior victims Patterson had located, the case against Whitmore was substantial enough that facing it was clearly the worst option for him. He surrendered his claim on the Bennett property completely and agreed, as part of a settlement that Patterson described as uncomfortable for him in precisely the right ways, to a formal restriction on his business practices regarding mail order arrangements and estate management solicitation. He was not in prison. That frustrated Amelia when she first heard the terms, and she said so to Patterson directly. Patterson said he will be, eventually. Men like this don't stop, but right now this protects your father's property, closes his access to you, and creates a public record of his conduct. Next time he does this, and he will do this again as a foundation. He paused. You built that foundation. The next victim benefits from it. She sat with that. It was not the ending she had wanted, but it was the ending that did the most actual good, and she was practical enough to understand the difference. She wrote to Wyatt that evening. "The matter is settled. My father is stable and in good hands. I'm coming back on the Thursday train. I'll arrive at Red Valley Friday evening." She folded the letter. She held it for a moment. Then she added one more line at the bottom. "I believe we have something to talk about. I've been thinking clearly for 3 weeks now, and the thinking keeps coming out the same way. I'll tell you when I get there." She sealed it. She sent it. And she spent the next 4 days doing exactly what she had promised herself she would do. Being present. Being her father's daughter. Sitting in the kitchen that smelled like bread, and listening to the stories he told in the evenings with the patient love of a person who understands that time is finite and attention is the only gift that cannot be replaced. On Thursday morning, she hugged her father at the door for a long time. "Come back," he said. "I will," she said. "Bring him next time," he said. "I want to shake the man's hand." She smiled. "I'll tell him." She picked up her case and she walked to the station, and she bought a ticket to Montana. She sat in the rail car with her hands flat on her knees. Outside, Ohio fell away behind her. Ahead, the land opened up the way it does when you are traveling towards something, rather than away from it, wide and full of weather and possibility. She was not arriving at a life, she was returning to one. And there was a difference between those two things that a year of Harlow Creek and a kitchen table full of account books and a man who had written to her father in February had made entirely, permanently clear. She knew the difference now. She was going home. Wyatt read her letter 3 times. Not because it was difficult to understand, because the last line needed to be real before he let himself believe it. I've been thinking clearly for 3 weeks now, and the thinking keeps coming out the same way. I'll tell you when I get there. He folded it, put it in his shirt pocket right beside the other one, the one with 7 words and 4 more on the back, the one he had carried for 13 months. 2 letters, the whole distance of the thing, from the worst of it to wherever this was now, pressed flat against his chest. Dolph found him standing at the fence line 10 minutes later, not doing anything in particular, just standing. Good news or bad news? Dolph said, she's coming back Friday. Dolph was quiet for a moment. Then he said, and she says she has something to tell me when she gets here. Dolph looked at the fence, then at Wyatt, then back at the fence. 12 years I've worked this land with you, he said. I've watched you lose a wife. I've watched you lose a son. I've watched you build everything back up from the bones of it twice. Without complaining. Without quitting. Without asking anyone for anything. He paused. Go meet that train. It arrives Friday evenings. I know when it arrives. Go meet it and don't be late. And for the love of everything decent, wear the blue shirt. Wyatt looked at him. The pressed one, Dolph said. Not the one you fix fence in. Friday came the way important days always come, ordinary in every external detail, which is its own kind of cruelty. The sun came up at the same time. The stock needed the same feeding. Pete Soren talked too much at breakfast about something that had nothing to do with anything. And Will Greer said nothing. And Dolph made coffee strong enough to dissolve regret. And the whole morning moved with the unhurried indifference of a world that does not adjust its pace for the things that matter most to the people living in it. Wyatt wore the blue shirt. He did not tell anyone he was leaving early. He simply went to the stable at 2 o'clock. The train was not due until 6 and saddled his horse. He needed the extra hours, not because of the distance. Because sitting still was not something he was capable of today, and moving toward her was better than standing at a fence line, pretending to examine fence posts he had already checked that morning. He arrived at Red Valley Station at 4:15. Gerald looked up from his window. Early, Gerald said. Habit, Wyatt said. Gerald's expression was the expression of a man who had watched this particular human being stand on this particular platform twice before, once in hope, once in grief, and who understood without needing to be told that today was different from both of those times. He did not say anything else. He just nodded and went back to his paperwork, which was the correct response, and Wyatt appreciated it. Wyatt sat on the bench. He set his hat on his knee. He waited. The 2 hours passed slowly, and then in the last 10 minutes all at once. He heard the whistle. He stood up. He walked to the platform and stood with his hat in his hands and watched the train come in with the steam and the noise and the grinding stop. And he thought about the first time he had done this, the pressed shirt, the package of gloves, the humming he hadn't noticed, and he thought about the second time, when he had come not in hope but in the desperate, focused energy of a man who has stopped grieving and started moving, and he had seen her helping an old woman with a bag before she saw him, and the recognition had hit him somewhere deeper than he had expected. And now this was the third time. The doors opened. People came off in the usual sequence, the families, the working men, the travelers. He watched each face with the same focused attention he had brought the second time, but without the desperation. He was not afraid she wasn't on it. She had said Friday. She had said she was coming. He believed her the way he had learned to believe her. Not blindly. Not because it was easier. But because 13 months of evidence had earned that belief. She stepped off the train. She was carrying her case in one hand and a brown paper parcel in the other. And she was scanning the platform the way she always did, quick, thorough, missing nothing. And when she found him, she stopped. Not in shock this time. Not in the physical jolt of the second meeting, when they had both been managing the collision of everything they had lost and everything they had not said. She stopped the way you stop when you see something you have been walking toward and you have finally arrived, and you need one full second to let the arriving be real. Then she walked directly to him. No hesitation, no careful approach. Directly, the way she did everything. You're early, she said. Earned. Habit. She almost smiled. Whose habit? Earned. Mine now, apparently. She looked at him. He looked at her. Earned. They were both doing the thing they had been doing since the second meeting, reading each other, taking inventory, checking whether the person they had been carrying in their mind matched the person standing in front of them. Earned. You look better, she said, than the last time I left. Earned. You've been gone 3 weeks, not 13 months. Earned. Still, she's better. He looked at her. So do you. She held out the brown paper parcel. I brought something. He took it. It was rectangular, not heavy, wrapped carefully. Open it later, she said. When I'm not watching. I'll be self-conscious. You, he said. Self-conscious? Earned. I have limits, she said. He held the parcel under his arm, the same arm that had carried the gloves 14 months ago. He realized, though he did not say so, and he picked up her case with the other hand. The wagon's out front, he said. Good, she said. Earned. I'm tired of trains. They were an hour outside of Red Valley before she said it. Earned. She had been quiet in the particular way she was quiet when she was thinking something through to the end before she spoke, and he had learned to leave that quiet alone. Earned. You did not interrupt Amelia Bennett's thinking. You waited for it to arrive. I want to stay, she said. He kept his eyes on the road. Earned. His hands were steady on the reins. Permanently, she said. Earned. Not as a guest, not as someone trying things out. She paused. Earned. I've been thinking about it clearly for 3 weeks. Earned. I thought about it while I was with my father. I thought about it on the train. Earned. I keep arriving at the same place. Where's that? He said. Here, she said, simply, without decoration. He was quiet for a moment. Earned. Then he said, you know what that means? Practically. It's not a small thing. I know what it means, she said. Earned. I've looked at your books. I know what the winters are like because you described them accurately. Earned. I know Dolph makes coffee that should be regulated. Earned. And Pete talks through every meal. Earned. And Will Greer took 4 days to decide I was acceptable. Earned. And the spring calves are being undersold to Garrett in Miles City. Earned. She looked at him. Earned. I'm not arriving blind. I know what I'm choosing. Earned. That's not what I'm asking, he said. She looked at him steadily. Earned. Then what are you asking? He pulled the horses to a stop. Earned. He turned on the seat to face her directly, the way a man turns when the conversation requires that he not be looking anywhere else. Earned. I'm asking, he said, whether you're staying because it makes sense, because the accounts add up and the arrangement is practical, and the alternatives are worse. Earned. Or whether you're staying because you want to. He held her gaze. Earned. Those are both valid reasons, but they're not the same reason, and I need to know which one it is. Earned. She looked at him for a long moment. When I was in Harlow Creek, she said slowly, I spent 11 months making decisions based entirely on what made sense. Earned. What would protect me? What could be proven? She paused. Earned. And every one of those decisions was right. They kept me safe. Earned. They got me out. I don't regret any of them. But, he said, but I spent a year living entirely in my head. Earned. She said, earned. And on the train back from Ohio, earned. I realized that the reason I kept thinking about this place, specifically this place, earned, not just Montana in the abstract, was not the accounts. She held his gaze. Earned. It was the letter you wrote my father in February. Earned. It was the fact that you kept every letter. It was the way you said, I'm not asking you to trust a stranger. I'm asking you to let me earn it, and then spent 13 months actually earning it without knowing if it would matter. She stopped. Earned. That's not sense. That's something else. And yes, I want to. Earned. The road was very quiet around them. All right, he said. Earned. She looked at him. That's all you're going to say? Earned. What would you like me to say? I just told you something significant. Earned. I know, he said. Earned. And I'm telling you all right. Earned. Which means yes. Earned. Which means I'm glad. Earned. Which means that what you just said is exactly what I've been hoping to hear since the first time I stood on that platform. Earned. He paused. I'm a plain speaker. All right means all of it. She stared at him for a moment. Earned. Then she said, your father was right about you. My father's been dead for 12 years, he said. Earned. What do you mean? In the letters. You wrote something he used to say. She looked at him. Earned. You wrote, a man who means what he says saves everyone a great deal of time. You said he told you that when you were 12. She paused. I read that letter more than any of the others. He was quiet. I almost wrote back about it, she said. I didn't because I thought it was too much to say to a stranger. She looked at the road ahead. Turned. But I thought, if he actually lives like that, if that's actually how he operates, then that's the thing I've been looking for without knowing how to name it. And he said, and you do, she said, you actually do. And he reached over and took her hand, not dramatically, not as a statement, the way you reach for something that belongs within reach. She turned her hand over and held his back. They sat like that for a moment in the stopped wagon, in the cold October air that smelled like grass and distance, with everything in front of them and enough behind them to know that what was in front of them was real. Then he clicked his tongue at the horses and they started moving again. Dolph saw the wagon coming from a quarter-mile out. He was on the porch with his coffee at 6 in the evening, which was not when he normally drank coffee, but he had positioned himself there deliberately and was not pretending otherwise. Pete Soren was somewhere behind him, visible in the doorway, also not pretending. Will Greer was at the fence line, technically checking something, actually just somewhere that gave him sight lines to the gate. The wagon came through. Dolph watched Wyatt's face first, the diagnostic red of a man who had known another man for 11 years and could read him the way you read terrain, by the way he held himself, by what his hands were doing, by the particular quality of his stillness or his movement. What Dolph saw made him take a slow drink of his coffee and exhale through his nose and look up at the sky for a moment with the private expression of a man whose long bet has finally paid out. Then he looked at Amelia. She was looking at the house, at the yard, at the fence line, at the outbuildings and the cold October air and everything that was going to be her daily life. She was doing inventory. He recognized it because he had watched her do it with the account books, but there was something else in it this time. Not just calculation, recognition, the look of someone arriving at something familiar. Wyatt helped her down from the wagon. Dolph came down the porch steps. Miss Bennett, he said. Mr. McCready, she said. I've decided to stay. Dolph looked at her, then at Wyatt, then back at her. That's so. Permanently, she said. I'll need a better chair at the desk. The current one is too low for the angle of the ledger. Dolph turned his face away slightly and did something with his expression that he did not want witnessed. When he turned back, he was composed. I'll see what I can find, he said. Thank you. She held out her hand and they shook, differently than the first time, not an introduction this time, but an acknowledgement. The handshake of two people who have taken each other's measure and are satisfied with what they found. She walked past him and up the porch steps and into the house. Dolph watched her go. Then he looked at Wyatt. Chair's fine, Wyatt said quietly. I know it's fine, Dolph said. She just wanted to tell me she knew where she was and what she was doing. Yes, Wyatt said. Smart woman, Dolph said. Yes, Wyatt said again. Dolph took a drink of his coffee. You going to ask her properly? Or are you going to stand here talking to me about chair heights? Wyatt looked at the house. I was going to give her a week, he said. Give her tonight, Dolph said. She didn't come back here to wait. He opened the parcel she had given him after supper, when the hands had cleared out and she was washing the cups at the basin, and the kitchen had the particular warmth that kitchens have when there are people in them who intend to keep being there. She heard the paper rustling and did not turn around. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a book, red cover, worn at the corners, the spine creased from reading. He turned it over. He recognized it, not the specific copy, but the title. She had mentioned it in her third letter, a novel with a red cover, something she had been reading on the train, something she liked but had not finished. He opened the front cover. Inside, in her handwriting, precise and clean, and exactly as he had always imagined it from knowing it on the page she had written, for the man who kept the letters. So he knows I kept them too. He stood there with the book open in his hands for a long moment. Then he closed it. He set it on the table. He walked to where she was standing at the basin. She turned before he got there. She always seemed to know where he was in a room, some awareness she had developed without announcing it, and she looked at him with those careful, clear eyes that had read him accurately from the first moment on the platform. You wrote in it, he said. It's a book, she said. Books are meant to be written in. That's not what most people think. I'm not most people, she said. No, he said, you're not. He stood there for a moment. Then he said, I'd like to ask you something. Earned. And I want to be clear that the answer can be no, or not yet, and either of those is a complete answer that I'll respect without discussion. She looked at him, waiting, not nervous present, earned, fully, entirely present, the way she brought herself to everything that mattered, earned. Marry me, he said. Not because we had an arrangement, earned. Not because you've been here, and the accounts look good, and it makes sense, earned. Because you're the person I want at the table. Every table, every morning, for the rest of whatever time I have. He held her gaze and did not look away. Earned. That's the whole case. I don't have more than that. Earned. She looked at him for a long moment. You said the answer could be no, she said. Earned. It can? Yes. She tilted her head slightly. Earned. What if the answer is that I've been thinking about nothing else for 3 weeks, and I decided on the train from Ohio, but I wanted to make sure you asked because I wasn't going to do it for you. Stared at her. Is that a yes, he said. That is an extremely clear yes, she said. And he exhaled. It was not a dramatic sound, just the sound of a man releasing something he has been holding for longer than he should have had to hold it. And he took her face in his hands. She put her hands over his. And he kissed her not as a beginning, because they were long past beginning, but as an arrival. And the kind of arrival you make when you have walked a very long road and you know, for certain, that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. And they were married 3 weeks later. And small, practical, the way they both wanted it. And the circuit preacher came through on a Tuesday, which was not the most romantic of days, but Amelia had said she did not care about the day, and Wyatt had said the same, and Dolph had said Tuesday was an excellent day because it was not Monday, which was a hard argument to refute. Dolph stood up for Wyatt. Ruth Hadley, who had received a letter and a train ticket from Amelia, and arrived 2 days before the ceremony with the expression of a woman who had been expecting this, but was reserving judgment until she'd seen it for herself, stood up for Amelia. She spent the first day examining Wyatt with the thorough assessment of a woman who had been widowed twice and understood exactly what she was evaluating. And on the second day, she told Amelia, with characteristic economy, he'll do. And Amelia had said, I know. Ruth had said, I wanted to see it for myself. The ceremony took 11 minutes. The preacher said the necessary words. Wyatt and Amelia said theirs, looking at each other, not at the preacher, because the preacher was just the formality, and they were the actual point. When it was done, Pete Soren shook Wyatt's hand for too long and said something elaborate that no one fully followed. Will Greer shook Amelia's hand once firmly and said, good, which was the most he had ever said in a single word, and everyone understood it. Dolph poured coffee strong enough to merit its own warning, and no one complained. Ruth Hadley stayed for 4 days. On the last evening, she sat with Amelia in the kitchen after the men had gone out, and she said, you're all right. I know, Amelia said. Don't get comfortable, Ruth said. Comfortable is how you stop paying attention. Pay attention. I will, Amelia said, and write to me, Ruth said. Not just when something's wrong, when things are right. I want to know. Amelia walked her to the wagon the next morning and held her for a moment, which Ruth received with the stiff, genuine warmth of a woman who did not initiate tenderness, but did not refuse it. Thank you, Amelia said, for everything. You did the work, Ruth said. I just had the table. She climbed onto the wagon and did not look back, which was entirely Ruth Hadley. And Amelia watched her go until the wagon turned the bend and was gone. The twist came in the way the best ones always do, not as a catastrophe, but as a revelation that reordered everything quietly and permanently. It came in the form of a letter from Harlan Cross, arriving 6 weeks after the wedding. Wyatt read it first at the desk alone. Then he folded it and held it and thought about it for a long moment before he brought it to Amelia. She was at the account table. She looked up when he came in, read his face immediately. She was very good at that and said, what? Cross found 2 more women, he said. 2 women Whitmore ran the same scheme on. He found them because Patterson's legal action in Ohio surfaced their cases. He paused. One of them is suing. The case is moving forward. Cross says with what you built and what Patterson has, Whitmore is almost certainly going to prison within the year. She sat with that for a moment. The other woman, she said, lost her family's property, Wyatt said. It's gone. Whitmore liquidated it through a legal entity 3 years ago. and she can't get it back. Amelia closed her eyes. But she knows, Wyatt said quietly. And she knows what happened to her was not her fault, and she knows the man who did it is being held accountable. And Cross said she wanted me to convey to you, specifically not to him, not to Patterson, that the file you built was what made her case visible. And Amelia opened her eyes. She looked at the desk. She thought about a back room in an eating house in Harlow Creek, holding the edge of a work table with both hands. And she thought about 4 letters sent from Ruth's address. And she thought about a watching man she had walked past with her back straight and her heart hammering. And she thought about the woman who had built those documents, not because anyone asked her to, not because she knew they would ever matter to anyone else, but because it was right and because it was what she was capable of doing, and she refused to do less than she was capable of. And she doesn't have to thank me, Amelia said. I know, Wyatt said. And I told Cross that. I built it for myself, she said. And so I could leave, so I could prove what he did. Not as some act of heroism. And I know, Wyatt said. But I'm glad it helped her, she said. And she said it the way she said all important things, without drama, without qualifier, directly and entirely, and meaning every word of it. And he sat down beside her. They were quiet for a moment, the way people are quiet when something has settled into its right shape, and the settling does not require narration. And I kept thinking, she said eventually, that the worst thing about what Whitmore did was that it took a year from us. And from me, from you. She looked at her hands. I was angry about that for a long time. Are you still? He said. She thought about it honestly. And no, she said, because the woman who came back from Harlow Creek was better equipped for this, for here, for you, for all of it, than the woman who got on a train in Ohio. She paused. And I don't think I could have built a partnership with you as the woman I was then. And I didn't know yet what I was capable of. I was different too, he said. And before I was looking for someone, after I was looking for you specifically. That distinction matters. She looked at him. It does, she said. And he picked up her hand from the table. She let him. And they sat in the kitchen of the house that had been too quiet for 6 years, and that was quiet now in the way a house is quiet, when it is full enough that the silence is chosen rather than imposed. And outside, Dolph was arguing with Pete Soren about something that involved a great deal of gesturing and very little resolution. And Will Greer's voice came through once, short and decisive, and the argument stopped. And the stock were settled. The accounts on the table were in order, the spring buyer negotiations rescheduled, the figures for the next quarter already improving in ways that Garrett in Miles City was not yet aware of. And the porch where you could see the mountains on clear days faced west. And the next morning was going to be clear. They both knew it, and neither of them said so, because some things do not need to be said to be true. And what they had was not the story they had planned in 47 letters. And it was harder than that. And stranger than that. And more real than that. And it was theirs, built from the actual material of who they had both become in the space between the planning and the arriving. And they had been cheated out of a beginning, so they had built a better one. And they were going to build everything else the same way. And with their eyes open, and with their hands in the work, and with the plain-spoken understanding that love is not a thing you find, and keep unchanged, it is a thing you keep choosing, and in the daily, and practical, and unglamorous reality of two people deciding, and every morning, and to be exactly where they are, and that was the whole of it. That was enough. That was more than enough.